Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Harry Fling Wrestling. I'm your host, Harry Fling, and today we're going to continue our theme of rewriting WrestleManias as we rewrite Wrestlemania XIII. And the tagline, Heat. Oh, is that going to keep you nice and warm? Well, spring's on the horizon here, so we probably don't need the heat so much, but in any event, ladies and gentlemen, this was from March 23rd, 1997 at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, Illinois, suburban Chicago, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I'm not from the area. So, this is the way I would have redone it. So, WrestleMania 13 was basic. Well, I'll get to that in a minute about how I'd redo it. WrestleMania 13 was pretty much a one-match show. A one-match show because one of the greatest matches I've ever seen of all time, Bret the Hitman Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin in a submission match. Oh my God, I can't speak enough of how great that match is, and it was so worthy, deservedly so, of Dave Meltzer's 5-star rating. Now, it's very rare when that ever happens, so you must cherish it. You'll know, if you're a diehard fan like me, you'll know in your heart when you see a 5-star wrestling match take place. And by God, it is nothing quite like it. Excuse me. So let's get down to business, shall we? So, the way I would have booked this show would be as a double main event. Now, if you go back to WrestleMania X, just 3 years prior, that was kind of along the lines of double main event. You could also argue about WrestleMania VIII, but we've already exhausted that. We talked about that ad nauseum last time, as that was the topic of the day. So double main event here. So here's how I do it. So the actual last match going on, if you really want to get serious about this main event stuff, main event is typically the last match that goes on for those that don't watch wrestling regularly. But in this case, here's how I do it. You'd have Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, already being the World Wrestling Federation champion. He relinquished the belt in real life because of a knee injury, so he claimed. But I think there was a lot of scapegoating here. I think he was trying to get around having to drop the belt back to Bret Hart. So I got to take you guys back even further. I've been thinking about this all day, so I never feel the need to explain, but I shall because I want to fill everybody in on what's going on here. WrestleMania 12, the previous year, was the Iron Man match main event between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. And Shawn Michaels defeated the Hitman in overtime, so it was 1-0. They went 0-0, no falls for a whole hour, till Bret decided that, okay, so we don't have a winner, so the belt stays with the champion already walking into the match. Roddy Piper, interim president of the World Wrestling Federation, while Gorilla Monsoon, who was our real president, was actually injured at the time. So Piper was the interim. He entered the ringside area just as Bret was about to walk out with the title and declared that sudden death rules must take place. Howard Finkel announced over the microphone, "There must be a winner!" And there you have it. HBK won. And at this time, there wasn't much of dissension to speak of between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. That's one of the greatest rivalries of all time. So Bret and Shawn talked about this backstage. They still had a little respect for each other. Bret for Shawn and Shawn for Bret. It had to go both ways. But not so much in 97. So Shawn agreed to do the favor and drop the belt a year later to Bret at WrestleMania. It was kind of a little agreement they had. Shawn claims to not remember that, though. And these are just reports I read on dirt sheets, I hear in shoot interviews, podcasts. You could search this out on your own. So anyways, this is what I would have had. So actually, let's backtrack a little bit. We also have a little caveat here with Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was on the rise. My favorite wrestler of all time, by the way, so I love Stone Cold and will continue to love him for as long as I live. Stone Cold was on the rise, having won King of the Ring, and his whole spiel. Austin 316 says, "I just whipped your ass." So, Stone Cold wanted to do big things, obviously, and one of those big things was challenge one of the greatest superstars at the time, Bret the Hitman Hart. So they had a great match at Survivor Series at Madison Square Garden. I didn't go to that one, but I remember rewatching it. The WrestleMania 13 match is better. I would have given the Survivor Series match 4 3/4 rating, but 5 stars for WrestleMania 13. Now, I would have still had that match. So here's how it would work. Similar to WrestleMania 10. And Bret Hart was in both events, by the way, so this is kind of coming full circle almost. Bret would have faced Stone Cold in a submission match, and Ken Shamrock from the UFC could have still been the guest referee of this match, the special guest referee, and Bret could have still won with Austin not submitting. I think all that stuff should remain untouched because of how great it was, hindsight being 2020. Now, you wouldn't have known it at the time, 28 years ago, but now you know, having watched it and seeing it all these years later. So the winner of the submission match between Bret and Austin would go on to face Shawn Michaels, and this is just the way I would rewrite the show. So Bret would win via referee's decision. Austin, I love that he didn't give up, that he didn't submit. I mean, the guts and glory and this whole thing here really shows with Stone Cold. The tenacity in Stone Cold really showed in that match that he could hang with the big time. Steve Austin here, he's got to be pushing 60 almost. I think he's 58 now. I don't know. Anyways, that's not the point. So then Bret Hart would go on to face Shawn Michaels much later in the evening, but it would not be an Iron Man match. Bret would go on to win the match, and Shawn would do the favor. Now, had this happened, we probably wouldn't be talking about one of the greatest rivalries of all time. See, neither man, how do I describe this? Sorry, I'm just kind of at a loss for words. Sometimes you have a word that you want to use, but you just can't think of what it is, and this is one of those times. Shawn, I don't think, had quite the amount of respect for Bret as Bret did for Shawn, so Shawn wasn't willing to return the favor. So there's part of me that thinks, as much as I love HBK, both men are some of my favorites of all time. Stone Cold will always be the best, but Bret and Shawn, they're right up there. I'll talk about my favorites in another video. But Shawn, it sounds like, wanted to try to escape the whole idea of returning the favor, so I think there's some merit to Bret's anger around that time and that he was justified to an extent. But then, you know, his heel turn was slowly and gradually building, so he's what you call a tweener. So he's part heel and part face, and that can happen as long as it's in the context of a turn. So Bret was always this good guy baby face for a long time. A proud Canadian. Everyone loved him all over the world. Now, in his mind, the American wrestling fans turned on him. But that wouldn't come till the night after WrestleMania when he cut one of the best promos. Raw from March 24th, 1997. Go back and watch it. It's on Dailymotion. Right now, with Peacock not having any more Raw episodes and Raw being transferred to Netflix, you can't really find everything so easily. So Dailymotion's a great place to go. What YouTube can't provide, Dailymotion will provide. So I would have had Bret go over Shawn there. And as for what would happen after, who the heck knows? I haven't really thought that far. Then, of course, Stone Cold would be another year till he'd get his world title match and then win at WrestleMania. So I would have still had Stone Cold win the Rumble going into this. Now, at this point in time, the winner of the Royal Rumble main events WrestleMania, gets their championship match. And yeah, there could have been that controversial finish. So I think President Gorilla Monsoon at the time should have went this route, but he didn't because of Shawn's injury and what have you. So that's what I think should have happened then and there. Now, as for the other matches, before I get too sidetracked talking about Bret and Shawn and their great rivalry, go watch A&E documentary if you want to, or go watch the DVD, Greatest Rivals, Bret versus Shawn. I think it was called. It came out like 14 years ago. Bought it for my brother for Christmas one year. He loved it. Still has it to this day. But yeah, A&E really covered it well, I think, a few months ago on their Sunday night wrestling series. So go ahead and watch that. Moving on now. Here's a match I'm very surprised did not take place at WrestleMania. Our main event that night was actually The Undertaker versus Psycho Sid in a snooze fest of a main event. You got Sid Udy, Sid Justice and Psycho Sid respectively. His real name's Sid Udy. May he rest his soul. May he rest in peace. He's only had 2 WrestleMania matches and he's main evented both of them, and they both sucked. I mean, come on now. The guy, he's okay in the ring, but he's not my favorite because his performance can get lackluster the longer you watch him in the ring. I mean, he's a giant 7-footer with not a lot of steam going for him. I'd say Kevin Nash is far more exciting to watch than Sid Udy. But, everyone's got an opinion on that one, so take it with a grain of salt. Kevin Nash is no HBK in that ring, as we know. But the first year I started watching wrestling and Diesel was the WWF champion, I actually love the Diesel character. I'm not going to lie. But, so Undertaker. Let's talk about him here. Undertaker versus Mankind in a casket match. This should have been the feud to end it all. Undertaker and Mankind, what an underrated rivalry that is. It doesn't get talked about nearly enough. I think because Undertaker and Kane was just so much better, and Kane wouldn't debut till later that year at In Your House Bad Blood, and the whole Hell in a Cell match. Thirsty. So, Undertaker's Mankind, I would have had the casket match with Taker finally ending the feud, tombstoning Mankind, putting him in the casket, shutting the door. Now, it's a predictable ending because that's happened a lot in the mid-90s with The Undertaker, so I don't think they wanted to go that route, especially this was a transitional time for the company. Society as a whole was changing, so this wasn't the best time to be watching all these white meat baby faces, if you will. Now, Mankind was managed by Paul Bearer. If you go back to watch SummerSlam 96 and the Boiler Room Brawl, great match. When I met Mick Foley many years ago and told him that, he was shocked and surprised. You really like that match that much? Well, I was 7 years old and I watched it, and boy, was that unusual for its time. There's a lot I could talk about in that match, but I won't get into it. So they had that match, and they had the Buried Alive match at the appropriately named pay-per-view In Your House Buried Alive in Indianapolis. And then, of course, they had their match at Survivor Series with Paul Bearer being suspended above the cage. Now, Paul Bearer, I'm sorry I didn't mention him earlier, he turned his back on Undertaker in the Boiler Room Brawl and gave the urn to Mankind. The person who gets Bearer's urn secures the victory in that match, and so there you have it. Undertaker and Mankind, they didn't really, after Survivor Series, Taker kind of floundered. They both kind of floundered around a little bit. Taker was in the world title picture with the Final Four pay-per-view. But here's what I would have had happen. In addition to Mankind being put in, I would have had Paul Bearer get stuffed in with him. Paul Bearer was a huge thorn in the side to Taker. I would have done something, I don't know, because sometimes these things, they can go overboard. What ended up happening was they had a match at Revenge of the Taker, which was the April In Your House pay-per-view live from Rochester. And Taker won the match, retained his title, and then he proceeded to burn the flesh of Paul Bearer. It burned his eyes or his face or something. It was just human flesh being burned. Similar, akin to what Mankind did to him 3 weeks prior on Raw, leading into Revenge of the Taker that year. I don't know that I'd do anything with Fire. I try not to go that route as far as booking shows. I don't want to get too crazy. This is a different time period. People did all sorts of crazy shit, but, we're in a more politically correct world that we live in, I like to think, for the most part. Or at least in terms of wrestling, we want to do something that's not going to... Well, you want shock value. You don't want to do something that's going to turn away the fans, like actively killing somebody. So I don't know that I'd go that route. I don't think I would. I'd stuff them back in the... I'd stuff both Mankind and Paul Bearer in the casket. Taker would. Shut the lid. And then, I don't know. I have to leave it up to the creative team to figure out what they want to do after. Taker actually could have gotten physical with Bearer here, and then that could have led to the ongoing storyline where he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to reveal this deep, dark secret about the night that the funeral home was burned," and that's what led into the Kane storyline there. So I think there could have been more blackmail going on. I actually enjoyed watching that throughout the spring and summer of '97, leading into the fall when Kane actually debuted. So yeah, Taker over Mankind in the casket match. This next match, since I'm taking Psycho Sid out of the main event, we're just going to have him wrestle Vader. Psycho Sid versus Vader. Vader will give him the edge on this one. Vader kind of got screwed in the WWF. He got the short end of the stick because he was supposed to defeat Shawn Michaels for the world title at SummerSlam. In Your House, It's Time, December of 96 from West Palm Beach, was centered around Vader, but Vader, I think, was injured at the time. Shawn Michaels, getting back to him, he was one of the most controversial figures backstage. He was difficult to work with. Anybody could tell you that. This is before he became a born-again Christian and changed his whole demeanor. Shawn was all kinds of crazy. He was an asshole. Nobody wanted to be around him, and rightfully so. I don't know if you would. Anyways, so Shawn didn't want to drop the belt to Vader. He didn't want to job to him. Not necessarily job. Job is another wrestling insider term for losing. Someone who loses a lot. Shawn certainly wasn't a jobber, so I don't want to use that term. I don't want to use that vernacular there. But certainly Vader would have gone over, and Paul Bearer was actually managing Vader in addition to Mankind at the time, so there could have been some screwy finish. And now it wouldn't have been an all-star, 5-star classic here, but it would have been good to just get these two on the card, and there could have been some substance there. I didn't really put much thought into that one, to be honest. Next match I would have kept the same, the Chicago Street Fight. Oh man, this was fun to watch. Ahmed Johnson and the Legion of Doom, Hawk and Animal, would still go over the Nation of Domination. Farouk, the leader, with Crush and Savio Vega by his side. Ahmed versus Farouk. I'm glad they didn't have a singles match at Mania. That would have stunk up the joint so badly. They had a stinker of a match at Royal Rumble 97 in San Antonio at the Alamo Dome in front of 64,000 in attendance, I believe, that night. I don't have the exact numbers on hand. But Ahmed, God, this is kind of a sad story. I loved Ahmed Johnson when I first started watching wrestling, 6-7-year-old me. And I actually got to shake his hand or slap him a high five in the lobby at the New Haven Coliseum at a July 96 house show. This really tall friend of ours held me up, and I got to slap him a high five. So I met Ahmed Johnson, technically. It was a short, brief encounter. Say what you will, but I met him. So Ahmed was taken out by Farouk that same month. Farouk debuted with this ridiculous, god-awful gladiator soldier gimmick from Roman times. And that goofy, dopey helmet he wore, my God, how did creative ever come up with that? How did Vince let them get away with that bullshit? So I'm glad he ditched the ridiculous costume and took on a gimmick similar to Malcolm X. Malcolm X was the leader of the Nation of Islam, so Nation of Domination was created as a result. It was supposed to be a pro-African-American stable, but they had Crush in the stable, it was white. They had Savio Vega, who was a Puerto Rican guy, so they didn't really stick to the whole African-American theme till later on down the road. They got D-Lo and Kama and Rocky. That's another story for another day. But this was all over the place. The action there with stop signs and fire extinguishers, trash cans. Farouk actually suffered a punctured lung, and he attributes this to Ahmed Johnson. Ahmed was just very rough in the ring. Farouk took him out with a injury to his kidneys. I think he kicked him a bunch in here. And this was a kayfabe injury, but in real life, as reality would play out, Ahmed actually had something wrong with his kidneys in August of that year. So he had to relinquish the Intercontinental title, and his push was stopped suddenly. He did not have the same momentum, and he was notorious. He was notorious for injuring people in the ring. Maybe not on purpose, but he was just so rough and very careless. People got injured. He injured himself multiple times. I think he concussed himself when he was doing the Pearl River Plunge, and somebody's leg kicked him in the head there. So Ahmed, it was almost hard to get behind him around this time, but there was still some hope. So great match for what it was as far as the weaponry goes. I would have kept this next match the same. Goldust versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley. You had Marlena in Goldust's corner and Chyna in Hunter Hearst Helmsley's corner. Chyna just debuted for the company and shook Marlena like a rag doll. Oh God, I didn't like Chyna when she first started. I loved when JR said at the Final Four pay-per-view, "Take her to jail," because she was basically a plant in the crowd. Marlena was just standing there smoking her cigar. She comes up and chokes her out. So, anyways, yeah, Chyna was a force to be reckoned with. Hunter, I would have had him go over against Goldust here because that feud did continue a little bit, but I don't think there was ever a conclusive ending. Goldust got a cheap DQ win on Raw, I think like 2 weeks later or something like that. Goldust, I don't think, had quite the steam as a babyface as he did as a heel. He started out as this very androgynous heel. He didn't even have Marlena with him until the Rumble of '96, and everyone thought he was gay. But, in that day and age, 30 years ago, we weren't a very accepting society, especially of anyone of the LGBTQ community like we are now. So this gimmick or any storyline thereto appertaining at that time would not play well in 2025. So I'm going all the way back to 95 here, and here we are talking about 97, WrestleMania 13. Goldust had a little bit of steam because people hated Helmsley so much. And of course, this is before he married the boss's daughter and became Triple H. Well, he became Triple H long before he married Stephanie, or was even associated with Steph. But, there was just something about him. He had this hateful arrogance about him. But I love that he was one of the few wrestlers billed from Connecticut. From Greenwich, Connecticut. So there's not many Connecticut wrestlers here. You had Matt Morgan from Fairfield, and I think Steven Richards was even billed from Wallingford, Connecticut, although he's a Philadelphia native. So yeah, that feud could have remained the same, and I think the next pay-per-view I probably would have had Goldust finally get the win, have both ladies banned from ringside. The next pay-per-view being Revenge of the Taker in your house. And but I think they wanted to keep pushing Hunter because he was supposed to be King of the Ring the previous year, and then the incident in MSG with the Click happened, and so they put the kibosh on that. So I don't think they wanted Hunter to look bad as far as losing, so maybe that's why they had the DQ finish. Then he won King of the Ring in 97, and the rest is history. All right, let's keep going here. Intercontinental Championship, Rocky Maivia, better known as The Rock, taking on the Wild Man, Mark Marrow. The reason I would have put this one here is because they started out as good friends as far as being on the same team at Survivor Series. Rocky debuted at Survivor Series and was the sole survivor on Mark Marrow's team. They were defeated Hunter Helmsley's team. Marrow and Helmsley had a long feud, which didn't really do much for Marrow, but helped Helmsley's stock, helped him rise up the ranks. So Rocky, I think, Wildman was starting to show little bits of, heelish antics towards his then wife at the time, Sable, who's now married to Brock Lesnar, 2025. She married him many years ago, but they're still married as far as I know to this day. So he was starting to show hints of a heel turn, I think right before his knee injury. You didn't see Marrow at WrestleMania 13. He was out with a very serious knee injury and didn't come back till October that year and repackaged as the boxer, marvelous Mark Marrow. So I think, there would have been a lot going on with Sable, and Rocky kind of came to Sable's aid when Mark was being verbally abusive to her at ringside. He got mad at her for costing him his matches. So I think Rocky, he was already Intercontinental Champion. I would have had him go over Triple H Thursday, Raw Thursday, because we had the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show. This is when Raw was on USA, so they couldn't air it that Monday, so that's why it was on Thursday, Raw Thursday. So I would have had Rocky go over on this one. I don't know what would have happened to Marrow afterwards. Next match for the World Tag Team Championship, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog. Not quite the Hart Foundation yet, but a great team full of two brother-in-laws that just couldn't get along prior to Brett reuniting them. I would have had them go over Doug Furnas and Philip LaFawn, a Canadian tag team, though Philip LaFawn's the only Canadian of that duo. Doug Furnas is from Oklahoma, was discovered by JR, who was, I think at the time, president of talent relations before Johnny Ace usurped him in 2004. So Doug Furnas had a lot of backing up from good old JR, Jim Ross. And it would have been a great match. They actually had a good match, not a great, but a good match at In Your House Final Four from Chattanooga. And that match ended, it had a shitty DQ finish. Owen Slammy broke, and I think they were going to do something with Owen and Bulldog, but then they ended up facing Vader and Mankind, a shitty encounter at Mania that year. So this would have been good. A lot of submission spots here, a lot of technical spots would have been great. Furnas and LaFawn were very nondescript. They just wore blue trunks, came out with this very dirgy music. Dun, 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 dun. You can listen to it on YouTube. And they weren't great as far as promos go, but incredible in the ring. But as far as promos, it left a lot to be desired. So I would have kept Owen and Bulldog still the champs. Next match, brother versus brother. Bart Gunn versus Billy Gunn. They had a one-off match December of 96 on Raw. Billy, I think, suffered a broken neck or some spinal injury in that match. I don't remember the exact circumstances. So Billy was definitely the stronger member of the team, the more charismatic, rather than Bart. I just remember both their wives, their real life wives, came in the ring and kind of got in a fight over this bullshit. Billy and Bart were not brothers in real life. Let's be clear about that. They were tag team partners in storyline, kayfabe. They were brothers. They, the Smoking Guns, Billy Gunn and Bart Gunn. Billy had let his ego go to his head when Sonny joined the team in the summer of '96, I want to say. They actually lost the titles at Mind Games in your house that September '96 to Owen and Bulldog, and Owen and Bulldog have been tag champion since then. So I would have Billy go over in this one only because Billy was on the rise. Bart, he floundered. They tried the whole Brawl for All thing, and oh my god, that looked good on paper, but I'm not going to get into Brawl for All now. And then he lost to Butterbean in a 27-second knockout, or it might have been less than that. Bart Gunn, his career was so embarrassing compared to Billy's. Billy at least has a lot more accolades. He might have been world champion, and maybe The Rock didn't do him much favors in the summer of '99 in that feud, but be that as it may, Billy is definitely the more memorable one. I think both men are now into their 60s and still wrestling. Billy looks amazing. You see him in AEW from time to time. He's daddy ass over there. Next match, they had this match, but I would have switched out a few participants. This is the Four Corners Tag Team Elimination Match, with the winner becoming the number one contenders to Owen and Bulldog's tag titles the very next night on Raw. The Godwins versus the Headbangers versus the New Blackjacks, and then I would add these guys, even though they were taken off television around this time. Fake Razor Ramon and Fake Diesel portrayed. Fake Razor was played by Rick Bogner, a longtime journeyman, just because he looked like Scott Hall. And of course, Fake Diesel was played by the man who would become Kane, Glenn Jacobs, later the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee. So, Razor and Diesel, they were just imposters, Fake Razor and Fake Diesel, and the fans saw right through it. I actually didn't mind them being around just because it was kind of funny to see other people portray already popular characters. I think Vince McMahon was going for the whole James Bond thing. Like, you know how James Bond was played by Sean Connery in one movie and Dennis Quaid in another and Pierce Brosnan in another. So he thought he could do the same. That only works with masked wrestlers. They're under a mask. You can't see what they look like, obviously. I don't know why I had to say that, but I did. But with the other guys, you can tell it's a blatant ripoff. Rick Bogner's physique looked nothing like Scott Hall's. He was kind of more flabby looking, and Scott Hall was more toned. Whereas Glenn Jacobs, you could see all the curls in his hair, and Diesel had kind of short. Well, they both had shoulder-length black hair. Diesel had more of a wavy shoulder-length look to him, and Glenn Jacobs, it looked like he just came out of having a bad perm. It was ridiculous. So I had Headbangers. They actually won the match in real life. Furnace and LaFawn were actually in this match. I would have had the Headbangers win only because they were starting to gain some steam, and it led to an okay match the next night on Raw, and Owen and Bulldog, and it's kind of a throwaway match. Then two more matches here. Well, the last match on the actual card, WWF was in a working agreement with AAA down in Mexico. It's something in Spanish I can't pronounce, so please forgive me. That's what AAA stands for. I'm not talking about the car service. Latin Lover versus Pierroth versus Cibernetico. I would have had Cibernetico go over in this one. All three of those men were entrants in the 1997 Royal Rumble. And Mil Mascaras was infamous for not wanting to look bad in that match or to be eliminated. You know how Royal Rumbles work. So he actually eliminated himself and did a splash onto Pierroth on the outside. Pierroth had a mask, as did Cibernetico. Cibernetico was a 20-year-old wrestler at the time from AAA down in Mexico. And I probably would have had him go over. He's the youngest of the bunch. And Latin Lover, I didn't really know much about him. Apparently he lost a match down in Mexico. I forget what it's called. It's another thing in Spanish where you lose the match and you have to give up your mask forever. They tried that with Rey Mysterio in WCW, and we all know how that went. And I'm glad Rey has long since put the mask back on. Rey Mysterio without the mask was never great. But this isn't about Rey tonight. So Cibernetico had go over Pierroth and Latin Lover. Then, if you're watching pay-per-views during the New Generation, which we were still technically in, we weren't quite in the Attitude Era yet, we had the Free-for-All. It was a 30-minute program, maybe it was an hour, on the preview channel where you'd order the pay-per-view and watch the cable on your cable box. Flash Funk versus the Sultan. Now, ordinarily, you probably had the Sultan go over, but I would have had Flash Funk. I felt bad for the poor guy. I mean, he just couldn't catch a break. Other than the one victory he got at In Your House It's Time against Leif Cassidy, Flash was just another enhancement talent, but he had a lot of charisma. This was Too Cold Scorpio from ECW. So I would have had him go over and get an upset win over the Sultan. Maybe have Mr. Bob Backlund, who was managing Sultan, go ballistic. Iron Sheik could have had a mishap with hitting the flag over Sultan. Sultan was Rikishi. Funny thing about the Sultan gimmick was that was supposed to be Sabu. Sabu only would have done it if his uncle, the original Sheik, not the Iron Sheik, two different guys, if the original Sheik was going to be his manager. So that fell through, and so they gave it to Salofa Fatu, who we know better as Rikishi, and the rest is history. So, let me know what you think in the comments here, and we'll keep on reviewing some WrestleManias up until weekend of April 19th and 20th, which will be WrestleMania 41 coming from Las Vegas. So stay tuned, and thank you for joining me for another edition of Harry Fling Wrestling. Take care now. Bye-bye.